Welcome to Lesson 2.4, How Stress Shows Up in Behavior and Decisions. In the last lesson, we explored the idea of stress leaks, subtle, often invisible friction points in your leadership role that drain energy over time. In this final lesson of Module 2, we'll shift focus inward. How does stress alter the way you communicate, lead, and decide before you consciously realize what's happening? Because while most people think of stress as something they feel, the more relevant question for leaders is, how does it make you act? And more specifically, how do your teams experience you when you're under pressure? That's where leadership impacts lives and where self-awareness becomes a performance multiplier. Here's a counterintuitive truth that most leaders miss. Stress often changes your behavior before it changes your emotional state. You may not feel anxious or overwhelmed, but your behavior has already shifted. Why? Because under pressure, your nervous system prioritizes survival, and it does that by adjusting your behavior automatically, speeding up, cutting off conversations, avoiding ambiguity, fixating on minor details. These changes happen before your conscious brain even registers that you're operating in a diminished state. Let's look at the behavioral signs that indicate stress is already active, even if you feel composed. Number 1, increased urgency. You speak faster, push harder, and shrink timelines, even when it's not required. Number 2, over-talking or dominating meetings. You drive toward action to avoid uncertainty. Number 3, reduced collaboration. You make more decisions solo to kind of maintain that control. Number 4, emotional flatness or withdrawal. You become transactional, distant, or overly logical. Number 5, escalated tone or sharper feedback. This one's pretty self-explanatory, but even if it's unintentional, your communication becomes clipped. These patterns may seem subtle, but they change how your team experiences your leadership and how much psychological safety they feel in high-pressure moments. Now let's talk about decision making. Stress doesn't just affect your behavior, it directly alters your cognitive process. When you're under pressure, your brain shifts from prefrontal cortex, strategic, logical, to amygdala-driven, reactionary, binary. The results are in narrow focus, you miss context or nuance, short-term bias, you over-prioritize immediate outcomes, all or nothing framing. Decisions feel more absolute. And loss aversion. You choose what feels safest, not what's best. This is how leaders end up making defensive decisions instead of deliberate ones, even when they're technically skilled and experienced. The foundation of composure is pattern recognition. You can't self-regulate what you don't notice. That's why it's critical to map out your own behavioral stress signals, the early indicators that your system is slipping into a performance drift. Because once you see the pattern, you can choose a different response. This is not about suppressing emotion or forcing calm. It's about being clear enough to lead with precision, even when the pressure is rising. Now let's walk through a quick example. You're preparing for a high visibility board presentation. You're confident in the numbers, but you start rechecking your slides for hours, rehearsing scenarios obsessively, snapping at small team questions, or feeling frustrated by dumb feedback. On paper, you're just being thorough, but in reality, your behavior is telling the truth before your emotions do. Stress is present, it's just showing up in behavior first. If you can name it, you can normalize it and intercept it before it spirals. Let's make this actionable. Identify your top 3 behavioral shifts that show up when stress starts to rise. For example, do you interrupt more meetings? Do you shift from collaborative to controlling? Or do you default to urgency over clarity? Go ahead and write them down. These shifts are your early warning signs, not just signs of failure. They're opportunities to pause, reset, and re-engage from a more strategic state. One of the most overlooked dynamics in executive leadership is this. You don't get to decide how composed you appear. Your team does. You may feel calm, but if your behavior signals urgency, frustration, or withdrawal, that's what your team will respond to. This is especially true during stress because your emotional tone sets the team climate. The way you carry pressure either contains it or spreads it. Quick but important note, this isn't about suppressing how you feel, it's about channeling pressure constructively. You can feel urgency without rushing. You can feel uncertainty without shutting down. You can feel frustrated without attacking. The goal isn't emotional numbness, it's behavioral intelligence. Because leadership is experienced at a behavioral level, not just the emotional one. Now take a moment to reflect. What's your first behavioral shift when pressure rises? How often do you catch it early? How has that shift impacted your team, even when you didn't mean it to? Start observing this in real time this week. These micro patterns are your key to long-term clarity, composure, and influence. That wraps up Module 2, Understanding Your Stress Triggers. By now you've learned to map your high-stakes triggers, differentiate internal versus external pressure, identify invisible stress leaks, and recognize how stress shows up in your behavior before you feel it. In Module 3, we'll shift from awareness of in-the-moment regulation. You'll learn tactical, practical tools to stay calm in meetings, respond instead of react, and reset your system after high-stake moments. I'll see you in Module 3.